Police now identify the victim as 24-year-old Valerie Reyes of New Rochelle, New York. Her body was found earlier this week on the side of the road, the quiet road in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was discovered inside a red suitcase. Her hands and feet were bound. Reyes had been reported missing to New York State authorities and was last seen on January 29th at about 9 a.m. Now, in a statement, police say her family was advised of the positive identification last night, and authorities are now sending heartfelt condolences to them. Now, investigators also say that a cause of death has not yet been confirmed, but many pieces of possible physical evidence were collected.
The phone rang late that night, and on the other end was a young woman who could barely steady her voice. She told her mother she was afraid. Not nervous, not upset, afraid in a way she had never felt before. She said something was wrong, that she couldn't explain it, that it felt final. There was no argument, no threat, just a certainty that sat heavy in her chest, the kind that doesn't come from logic, only instinct. She stood alone in a quiet apartment, surrounded by familiar walls that suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. She tried to explain the feeling, but the words failed her. All she could say was that she felt like she was going to die. Soon, her mother tried to calm her, to ground her, to make sense of something that refused to be understood. They talked for a few minutes more. Then the call ended. No alarms were raised, no doors were locked in panic. Life on the surface went on. And right here, before we go any further, if you're new to True Crime Stories Chronicles, take a moment to subscribe. We tell these stories with care, accuracy, and respect. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. Because what that young woman didn't know was that her fear wasn't random. And that night, she wasn't alone. Before fear entered her life, Valerie was known for how deeply she belonged to her family. She grew up in New Rochelle as the only daughter in a close-knit household, surrounded by siblings who filled the home with noise and movement. Sundays were sacred, a day reserved for being together. Board games spread across the table, long walks outside, small cafes where conversations lingered longer than planned. These routines grounded her. They made the world feel manageable. Her closest bond was with her mother. They spoke often, sometimes about important things, sometimes about nothing at all. Valerie trusted her in a quiet, natural way, the kind of trust built over years of listening and understanding. Around family, she was playful and liked, still joking with her younger brothers long after childhood had passed. Creativity shaped nearly everything she loved. Valerie read constantly, always with a book close at hand, whether she was working, traveling, or sitting alone in a cafe. She worked at a bookstore in a shopping mall, a job that felt less like work and more like belonging. She enjoyed recommending novels to strangers, talking about authors and stories as if they were old friends. Reading was not an escape for her. It was connection. Art, however, was where she felt most alive. She drew portraits of people she cared about, filling pages with faces and details that others overlooked. She dreamed of becoming a tattoo artist, inspired by her older brother. At first, she simply let him practice on her. Over time, the art itself pulled her in. She imagined opening her own tattoo shop one day, covering skin with designs that meant something personal. It wasn't a rushed dream. It was something she quietly worked toward. Valerie was gentle by nature, thoughtful. She paid attention to how others felt and rarely put herself first. At the same time, she carried private struggles. Anxiety came and went. Some days felt heavier than others. Creativity helped her manage those moments, drawing, reading, singing softly when she was alone. She didn't dramatize these feelings or share them widely. She handled them the way she handled most things, quietly. By the time she was living on her own, her world had grown smaller. The basement apartment was modest and familiar, but nights were quieter than before. Family wasn't just down the hall anymore. Friends weren't always nearby. In the stillness, her thoughts had more space to move. From the outside, Valerie's life looked calm and full of promise. She had plans. She had love around her. She had time. No one imagined how quickly that sense of safety would begin to slip away. Valerie didn't meet him through friends or family. There was no shared history, no familiar circle connecting them. Their first contact came through a dating website, the kind of casual online space where conversations begin lightly and expectations often stay undefined. At first, there was nothing unusual about it. He was attentive, eager, and quick to respond. For someone like Valerie, who valued conversation and emotional honesty, that initial attention didn't feel threatening. But very early on, the balance felt uneven. While Valerie treated the connection as something exploratory, he seemed to attach meaning to it almost immediately. Messages came often. Plans were suggested quickly. He spoke about the future in a way that made Valerie pause. She liked him, but she didn't move at the same speed. Her life was full of plans that didn't revolve around another person yet. She wasn't searching for permanence. She was still building herself. As the weeks passed, the difference between them became harder to ignore. His interest deepened. Hers stayed measured. When he began talking about living together, about commitment that felt premature, Valerie felt pressure instead of comfort. She tried to be honest rather than avoidant. She explained that she wasn't ready for what he wanted, that she didn't see a long-term future forming between them. Ending the relationship wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no public argument, just a clear decision. Valerie believed that honesty would be enough. For her, the breakup marked an ending, a line drawn so both people could move forward separately. But for him, it didn't land the same way. After the relationship ended, messages continued, calls followed. Sometimes the reason sounded practical, sometimes emotional. Each contact felt like another attempt to keep a connection alive that Valerie thought she had already closed. She didn't respond with anger. She didn't escalate. She tried distance. She tried silence. Still, the communication didn't fully stop. To those around her, Valerie didn't describe him as violent or openly threatening. What unsettled her was the persistence, the way no didn't seem final. Attention that once felt flattering now felt heavy. Familiar. Too familiar for something that was supposed to be over. Eventually, she made her position unmistakably clear. She told him she wanted no further contact. She blocked him on social platforms. She asked friends to help create distance where she couldn't. From Valerie's perspective, the chapter was closed. But somewhere between what she believed and what he accepted, there was a gap. And that gap was quietly waiting to be filled. Months passed with little contact, and for a while it seemed as though distance had finally done its work. Valerie focused on her routines again: work, art, family time. The tension she had carried after the breakup slowly eased. The silence felt like closure. Then the message arrived. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't an apology. It was practical. Or at least framed that way. He claimed that her debit card information had been used for an online purchase by mistake and that he needed to return the money. The explanation felt oddly specific, almost rehearsed. Valerie didn't understand how her card details could still be accessible, but what unsettled her more was the timing. After months of quiet, this was the reason he chose to reappear. The message forced her into a position she hadn't asked for. Responding meant reopening communication. Ignoring it risked leaving unfinished business hanging over her. Valerie didn't feel comfortable meeting him herself, and she didn't want another direct exchange that might invite further contact. The situation felt small on the surface, yet it stirred a familiar discomfort she couldn't fully explain. So she chose a buffer. Rather than see him personally, Valerie asked a trusted friend to handle the exchange. The decision wasn't dramatic, just careful. It allowed her to keep distance while resolving the issue cleanly. The money was addressed. The excuse was settled. There was no confrontation, no argument, no reason, at least logically, for contact to continue. After that, communication stopped again. To an outsider, the situation looked finished. A loose end tied up. A brief inconvenience handled responsibly. Valerie herself believed the matter was closed. She returned to her routines and tried to push the unease aside. But something shifted after that exchange. In quiet moments, doubt crept in. Living alone began to feel heavier. Ordinary sounds in her apartment drew more attention than before. She double-checked doors. She replayed conversations in her mind, wondering why something so minor had left such a strong impression. The fear wasn't constant, but it returned unexpectedly. A sudden sense that she was being watched, or that she had invited something back into her life without meaning to. She didn't tell many people about this change. There was nothing concrete to point to. No message, no threat, no reason that sounded rational when spoken out loud. And yet, despite all appearances, the feeling grew stronger. as if contact that was supposed to bring closure had done the opposite. By Monday evening, the feeling Valerie had been trying to push down finally broke through. She picked up her phone and called her mother. When Norma answered, she immediately sensed something was wrong. Valerie's voice didn't sound like it usually did. It wasn't rushed or angry. It was unsteady, as if she were holding herself together, word by word. She told her mother she was scared. Not because of a fight, not because of a problem she could explain. She said the fear had no clear source, only a weight pressing on her chest that refused to lift. Valerie struggled to describe it, repeating that she didn't understand where it was coming from. What she did understand, she said, was how real it felt. At one point, her voice dropped. She told her mother that she felt like she was going to die. Norma tried to bring reason into the conversation. She reminded her daughter that fear can lie, that anxiety can twist ordinary moments into something overwhelming. She asked questions. She offered reassurance. She told Valerie she could come home, that she didn't have to be alone. But Valerie didn't take her up on the offer. She didn't argue either. She listened quietly, as if part of her wanted to believe the words but couldn't fully hold on to them. On-screen dialogue could appear here, simple and restrained. "Mom? I don't know why, but I feel like something bad is going to happen. I just don't feel safe." The call ended without resolution. There was no clear answer to what had triggered the fear. Norma assumed the emotions were tied to recent stress and a breakup Valerie had gone through days earlier. She told herself her daughter needed rest. They planned to see each other the following afternoon. With that, the conversation was placed gently aside, folded into the rhythm of a normal evening. Later that night, Valerie sent her mother a message wishing her good night. The words were calmer, reassuring. She also reached out to her closest friend, sharing the fear she hadn't been able to shake. Talking helped, at least on the surface. Her mood seemed to lift slightly. The intensity softened enough for her to believe she could sleep. Inside her apartment, Valerie tried to settle herself the way she always did. She distracted her mind. She focused on small comforts. She reminded herself that nothing tangible had happened. That fear alone wasn't proof of danger. Eventually, she prepared for the next day. Work, errands, ordinary plans that suggested continuity. To the people who loved her, the night ended quietly. There were no frantic calls, no warnings issued, no sense that time was running out. But when Valerie finally put her phone down, unaware that it would never light up in her hand again, that call to her mother became the last time anyone heard her voice. The next day didn't begin with panic. It began with waiting. Valerie was scheduled to work that morning, yet no one heard from her. At first, it didn't raise alarms. She had been emotional the night before. Maybe she overslept. Maybe she needed space. Hours passed and the silence stretched longer than it should have. Her phone went unanswered. Messages stayed unread. By the afternoon, concern replaced patience. Her mother tried calling again, then again. Each attempt went straight to voicemail. Norma told herself not to jump to conclusions. Valerie was an adult. She lived independently. Still, something felt wrong. Not dramatic, just unsettled. They had plans to meet that day. Valerie never missed plans without explanation. When another day passed without contact, the unease hardened into fear. Friends tried reaching her. Coworkers noticed she hadn't shown up for her shifts. Valerie wasn't the type to disappear without a word. She was responsible, reliable. Silence did not fit her. That disconnect between who she was and what was happening made the absence impossible to ignore. Norma's thoughts returned to that phone call, the fear in her daughter's voice, the certainty. At the time, it felt abstract. Now it felt specific. By the time the family contacted the police, hours mattered. Officers began with standard questions. Had Valerie ever left town suddenly? Was she upset? Could she have chosen to take time away without telling anyone? These were reasonable questions rooted in procedure. From the outside, the situation could be explained away as stress or independence, but Norma rejected that logic immediately. Her daughter would not have vanished without telling someone. She would not have ignored her job. She would not have left loved ones searching for answers. Norma didn't have evidence, only instinct, but it was firm. This was not choice. This was interruption. As the report was filed, the gap between official reasoning and maternal certainty widened. The police noted the absence of immediate signs pointing to danger. No frantic messages, no clear threats, no obvious trail. To them, it was a missing person case still searching for context. To Norma, it already felt like something had been taken. Photographs were shared. Descriptions circulated. Friends and family retraced steps, replayed conversations, searched for moments they might have misunderstood. Every unanswered call felt heavier than the last. And as the hours turned into days, the silence stopped feeling empty. It started to feel deliberate. When officers entered Valerie's apartment, nothing immediately signaled violence. The door showed no damage. Windows were intact. There was no sign that someone had broken in or forced their way inside. The space looked lived in, quiet, personal, ordinary. At first glance, it appeared as though Valerie had simply stepped out and not returned. But as the room was examined more closely, details began to stand out. In the bathroom, small specks of blood were visible. On the floor, near the toilet, on a pillowcase. They were faint and scattered, not pooled or concentrated in one place. To investigators, these marks didn't immediately suggest a crime. They could have come from something minor, a cut, a nosebleed, an accident that didn't warrant attention. On their own, the spots were easy to explain away. What proved harder to dismiss was what wasn't there. Valerie's phone was missing. So was her iPad. Her wallet wasn't in the apartment. Some of her clothing was gone, along with a small pillow. None of these absences fit together cleanly. If she had left voluntarily, why take only certain items and not others? If she planned to travel, where was the preparation? No suitcase was missing. No note had been left behind. From an investigative standpoint, the apartment suggested movement without clarity. Nothing pointed directly to violence, yet nothing supported the idea of a planned departure either. The space sat in an uncomfortable middle ground. Too tidy for chaos, too incomplete for intention. For Valerie's parents, that ambiguity didn't exist. They knew their daughter's habits. She did not disappear. She did not leave questions hanging. She would never have gone days without contacting them, especially after the conversation she'd had with her mother. Norma told officers about that call. About the fear Valerie couldn't explain, about her certainty that something was wrong. In that context, the apartment no longer felt neutral. What struck the family most was how familiar everything looked. Her belongings were where she usually left them. The space still felt like hers. That familiarity made the absence feel sharper, not softer. It was as if Valerie had been interrupted mid-life, not someone who had chosen to walk away from it. To the investigators, the apartment offered no clear answer. To her family, it felt like a room holding its breath. An ordinary place concealing something no one had seen yet. As the days passed with no word from Valerie, investigators shifted their focus to what little activity could still be traced. Her bank account became the first source of movement. Records showed that money had been withdrawn from her debit card, not once, but multiple times, from ATMs in and around New Rochelle. The total amount climbed quickly, reaching a figure that made it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. For a brief moment, the withdrawals brought hope. If money was being taken out, maybe Valerie was alive. Maybe she was moving. Maybe there was still time. Officers requested footage from the ATM cameras. When one of the recordings came back, it showed a figure near a machine early in the morning. The image wasn't clear enough to confirm identity, but the person's height, build, and clothing were close enough to Valerie's that investigators asked her mother to look at it. Norma studied the screen carefully. She hesitated. Then she said the words everyone wanted to hear. It looked like her daughter. That single moment changed everything. The image was shared more widely. Valerie's description and clothing were circulated publicly. Appeals went out asking anyone who had seen her to come forward. Social media filled with concern and speculation. Tips began to arrive almost immediately. Some people claimed they had seen Valerie near a train station. Others were certain they had spotted her in Manhattan. A few said they had spoken to a young woman who resembled her in a bar. Each lead was followed. Each one led nowhere. As days passed, the hope that had sparked so quickly began to fracture. Locations didn't match. Timelines didn't align. Witnesses grew uncertain when questioned more closely. The sightings dissolved under scrutiny, leaving nothing solid behind. What remained was the fact that money was still being taken out and that someone was moving through the city using Valerie's card. To her family, the waiting became unbearable. Every update lifted their spirits briefly before letting them fall again. Norma replayed the image of the ATM footage in her mind, wondering if she had seen what she wanted to see rather than what was actually there. And here's where I want to pause and ask you, what do you think was happening at this point? Panic, control, or something planned? Let me know in the comments. Because while the public searched for Valerie, the truth was already moving quietly in the opposite direction, and hope was about to give way to something far more final. A week after Valerie disappeared, the search shifted without warning. On a quiet morning in early February, a road crew was carrying out routine work in a wooded area near a roadway in Greenwich, Connecticut, miles from Valerie's apartment. The job was ordinary, the kind done without expectation of discovery. Then one of the workers noticed something out of place several yards from the road, a red-orange suitcase, resting where luggage had no reason to be. It didn't look abandoned by chance. It wasn't weathered or broken. It looked placed. Curiosity drew one of the workers closer. When the zipper was pulled back, the smell made the situation instantly clear. The suitcase was closed again. Police were called. The area was secured. When investigators arrived and opened it fully, they found the body of a young woman inside. She was dressed in everyday clothes, a shirt and jeans, but her shoes were gone. Her wrists and legs were restrained. Tape had been wrapped around her mouth and chin. Her face and head showed signs of severe assault. The condition of her body indicated she had been dead for several days. The search for a missing woman became a death investigation in a single moment. The remains were transported for examination, and the next day the cause of death was confirmed as strangulation. To formally identify her, Valerie's father and older brother were asked to come to the morgue. They made a decision together. Norma would not be there. She would not see her daughter like that. Even so, there was no doubt. Despite the injuries, despite the time that had passed, they knew it was Valerie. As devastating as that moment was, it wasn't the last cruelty surrounding her discovery. During the initial response at the scene, one of the road workers took photographs of Valerie's body. Instead of keeping them private, he showed the images to others and even contacted a media outlet, offering to sell the photo. The image nearly became public. When authorities learned what had happened, the worker was placed on administrative leave, and his employer later issued a public apology. By then, the damage had already been done. Valerie's family had to carry the knowledge that her final moments had been treated as spectacle by someone who had no connection to her life. For investigators, the suitcase marked the point of no return. There would be no reunion, no explanation offered by Valerie herself, only evidence, timelines, and unanswered questions. For her family, it ended something far greater than a search. From that moment on, the case was no longer about finding Valerie. It was about understanding how someone had taken her, moved her, and tried to make her disappear. With Valerie now confirmed dead, the withdrawals from her bank account took on a new meaning. What had once suggested movement and hope now pointed to something far colder. Investigators returned to the financial trail with urgency, lining up times, locations, and footage. ATM cameras had captured the person using Valerie's card. The images showed a figure in dark clothing, a hood pulled up, the face kept deliberately out of view. The body language was careful, deliberate. This wasn't someone confused or rushing. Each withdrawal happened early in the morning hours when fewer people were around. One detail changed everything. In one of the recordings, the camera briefly caught the vehicle connected to the transaction. Not the driver's face, just the car. That was enough. Using the license plate, investigators traced it back and learned the vehicle wasn't owned by Valerie or anyone in her family. It had been rented. The rental records narrowed the window. The car had been taken out for only 2 days, January 28th and 29th, aligning precisely with Valerie's last known contact and the first unauthorized withdrawal from her account. The name on the rental agreement was familiar by now. Javier, the same man Valerie had met online, the same man she had broken up with months earlier, the same man who had found reasons to re-enter her life when she tried to close the door. The timeline snapped into focus. The withdrawals began just hours after Valerie's final phone call to her mother. They continued in the days that followed, draining more than $10,000 from her account. Someone had access not only to her card but to her personal information, and was confident enough to keep using it. What stood out most wasn't speed or panic, it was patience. Javier hadn't acted in a sudden burst. He waited. He moved carefully through the city, covered his appearance, and chose times when attention would be minimal. The persistence Valerie had felt months earlier had never disappeared. It had simply gone quiet. For investigators, this was the turning point. The missing pieces began to align around a single figure. The debit card excuse, the continued contact, the unexplained fear Valerie had felt days earlier. None of it existed in isolation anymore. The mask hadn't fallen because of a confession or a mistake. It slipped because money leaves records. And as detectives prepared to confront the man at the center of those records, one truth became impossible to ignore. Whatever Javier felt for Valerie hadn't ended when the relationship did. It didn't fade with distance. It waited. When investigators began looking closely at Javier's life, a picture emerged that explained the persistence Valerie had struggled to escape. He was born in Venezuela and later held dual citizenship with Portugal. In 2017, he arrived in the United States under a program that allowed short-term entry without a visa. When that period expired, he didn't leave. He stayed quietly, avoiding attention, moving between jobs that kept him under the radar. He lived in Flushing, New York, and worked wherever he could. Cleaning, food service, cafe work. To people around him, he didn't stand out. Friends described him as polite, helpful, and reserved. There were no public signs of aggression. Nothing that would immediately raise concern. What mattered more was how he formed attachments. When Javier met Valerie online, he became emotionally invested almost immediately. She wasn't just someone he liked, she became central to his sense of direction. While Valerie viewed the relationship as one part of her life, Javier treated it as the foundation of his future. When she pulled away, he didn't adjust. He clung harder. Investigators learned that after the breakup, Javier repeatedly tried to reinsert himself into Valerie's life. Calls, messages, reasons to meet. When sympathy didn't work, practicality did. The debit card excuse wasn't random, it was a method. A way to create contact without appearing confrontational. During questioning, Javier's stories shifted. At first, he denied recent contact altogether. He claimed he hadn't seen Valerie in nearly a year and insisted he had found her wallet by chance, complete with the card and its PIN written down. When confronted with evidence that placed him near her apartment and tied him to the rental car, his account changed again. This time, he said, they had met voluntarily. He told investigators that Valerie had invited him over, that the meeting was intimate, that they reconnected after months apart. According to him, everything was fine until an accident occurred. A fall, a sudden injury. He claimed panic followed. He said fear took over. But the details didn't align. His explanations came only after evidence was presented, never before. Each version filled gaps exposed by facts, not memory. When shown images recovered during the investigation, his tone shifted again, quieter, more emotional, yet still carefully framed to soften responsibility. What investigators heard wasn't a confession. It was a performance built on avoidance. Behind the changing stories was a pattern Valerie had already recognized months earlier, an inability to accept finality. Javier didn't respond to rejection by stepping back. He responded by reshaping reality until it suited him. And now, with his final version of events on record, one question remained. If what he described was true, why did none of the evidence agree with him at all? Javier's final account rested on one central claim, that what happened to Valerie was an accident, followed by panic. According to him, they had met voluntarily, spent time together, and during an intimate moment she fell, struck her head, and became unresponsive. Everything that followed, he said, was fear-driven confusion rather than intent. The physical evidence told a different story. The medical examination established that Valerie's cause of death was strangulation. That finding alone contradicted the idea of a fatal fall. Head injuries were present, but they were not the cause of death. Strangulation requires sustained force. It is not instantaneous. It cannot be explained by a single moment of panic or an accidental impact with the floor. Her body showed extensive signs of assault. Injuries to her face and head indicated repeated blows. Her wrists and legs had been bound. Tape had been wrapped around her mouth and chin. These were not actions taken in seconds. They required time, intention, and control. They also required Valerie to still be alive while at least some of those actions occurred. Javier's explanation for the restraints failed under scrutiny. He claimed he bound and taped her out of fear that she might scream if she regained consciousness. That explanation conflicted with the medical timeline. Valerie did not die from an injury that rendered her instantly unconscious. The strangulation itself caused her death. His actions after Valerie died further undermined his story. He did not call for help. He did not seek medical assistance. Instead, he removed items from her apartment, took her personal belongings, and used her debit card repeatedly over several days. He transported her body across state lines, placed it inside a suitcase, and abandoned it in a wooded area. These steps were not consistent with shock or confusion. They showed planning after the fact. The financial trail reinforced that conclusion. Withdrawals began just hours after Valerie's final phone call to her mother and continued while she was already dead. Javier covered his appearance, used a rental car, and selected times that minimized visibility. Each decision suggested awareness, not chaos. When investigators compared Javier's statements to the evidence, the gaps were unavoidable. His account changed only when facts forced it to. The physical findings never shifted. In the end, the story he told relied on fear and accident. The truth, supported by evidence, showed restraint, violence, and deliberate concealment. And those two versions could not exist together. This case forces an uncomfortable reflection on how trust works, not as a feeling, but as access. Valerie didn't make reckless choices. She didn't ignore obvious danger. She moved through her life the way many people do, believing that honesty, distance, and clarity were enough to keep her safe. What she couldn't see was how trust, once given, can linger even after a relationship ends. There is a difference between love and fixation, and this case shows how easily the two can be confused. Love respects limits. It accepts endings. Obsession resists them. It reframes rejection as misunderstanding and persistence as loyalty. From the outside, that persistence can look harmless, even romantic. From the inside, it becomes exhausting, a pressure that never fully releases. Valerie's experience also reminds us why intuition matters, even when it doesn't come with proof. Her fear did not arrive with explanations or evidence she could point to. It arrived as a feeling, sudden, heavy, and unfamiliar. Society often encourages people to dismiss those moments, to rationalize them away, especially when no rule has been broken and no threat has been spoken. But intuition is not about prediction. It's about recognition. The mind registering patterns the heart hasn't named yet. Importantly, this story is not about fault. Valerie did nothing wrong by trusting someone she once cared about. Responsibility rests solely with the person who chose to ignore her boundaries, her words, and her right to move on. A lack of visible warning signs does not equal safety, and recognizing that reality does not mean assigning blame to those who couldn't see what was hidden. What makes this case especially haunting is how ordinary it began. A conversation, a past connection, a belief that distance had solved the problem. It shows how danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits quietly, reshaping itself until it can re-enter unnoticed. When trust becomes access, the cost can be devastating. And remembering Valerie means more than remembering how she died. It means acknowledging the quiet moments where she listened to her instincts, even when she couldn't explain them, and understanding that her story is a reminder to take those moments seriously, without shame, without dismissal, and without fear of being wrong. Valerie's life did not end where the story often tries to freeze her, in a moment of violence. Long before that, she was a daughter who laughed easily with her family, a sister who stayed playful long after childhood, and a young woman who carried her creativity quietly but fiercely. She was someone who noticed details, who saw beauty in faces and stories, who believed art could leave something meaningful behind. She had plans that were still unfolding, designs she hadn't drawn yet, skills she was still learning. A future she imagined slowly, carefully, without rushing herself into someone else's timeline. Her dream of becoming a tattoo artist wasn't about recognition or attention. It was about expression, about leaving marks that mattered to the people who carried them. That future was taken from her without warning. For her family, time didn't stop, it fractured. Ordinary days continued, but with a permanent absence woven into them. There would be no more Sunday gatherings where Valerie's voice filled the room. No more casual phone calls. No more updates about work, art, or small plans that once felt endless. The loss didn't arrive all at once. It settled in quietly and stayed. What makes Valerie's story especially heavy is not only how it ended, but how much life remained unfinished. She was not defined by fear or by the final moments that now surround her name. She was defined by her kindness, her creativity, and the way she moved gently through the world. Remembering Valerie means holding space for who she was, not just what happened to her. It means refusing to let her become a headline or a detail in a case file. It means understanding that behind every true crime story is a life that should have continued. If Valerie's story stayed with you, share it. Because attention keeps victims from being forgotten. And tell me, what moment changed how you saw this case? And don't forget to like and subscribe to True Crime Stories Chronicles. Your support helps ensure these stories are told with care, accuracy, and respect, and that the lives behind them are never reduced to silence.